What's up? So, I just wanted to talk for a sec about some of the good and then some of the bad that we've seen so far um, from Joe Biden's administration. It's been 3 weeks now since he was inaugurated. Um, and I mean, honestly, I guess the news cycle moves fast, but it feels like a lot has already happened just in that span of time. So, in terms of the good, there are some things that he's done that I legitimately commended and thought were, not a complete waste of time, basically. For example, he had some executive orders that, obviously, this has been widely reported on in the media. I feel like that's mainly what people have been talking about is these executive orders, but, he rejoined the Paris Climate Accord. That was good. That was a initiative that was spearheaded by mostly the U.S. and China, and back in 2016, I believe. And obviously, 2016 we elected Trump, and then he immediately pulled us out of those accords. So China has basically been leading the way on climate initiatives for the past 4 years and building the most solar panels, building the most lithium-ion batteries, building the most electric cars. And the U.S. has been lagging behind a lot. Not that those, the thing about the Paris Climate Accords is like, they're definitely important, don't get me wrong, but they're not as aggressive as people make them sound, because like, for example, China's goal in those accords was by 2030, their carbon emissions will peak, and then from there it'll go down. And then by 2060, I believe, that was the year they set the goal to be completely carbon neutral. So by 2060, they'll have theoretically made the transition to 100% renewable energy. But I'm like, that's 40 years from now. Can we really afford that? The Earth is dying now. And we're already seeing impacts of climate change, how that affects severe weather disasters, natural disasters, and just all natural phenomenon is affected by this. So personally, I think we need to take way more aggressive action than being carbon neutral by 2060. If I'm 60 years old and we're just now transitioning to renewables, I think the battle is already lost. That being said, I'm glad Biden rejoined, those accords, because at least it's something. It's better than no climate action at all. It kind of goes back to the lesser of two evils argument again, but anyway, so he did that. He's extending DACA, so that's good. That's something that I was really happy about. He's also like doing some other minor things, like he's taking the word alien out of all immigration bills and documentation. So that's also significant. Addressing a group of people as aliens is incredibly dehumanizing, and it's something we had been doing for a really long time. So I'm glad that that's not going to be officially acceptable anymore. It's also set forth new approaches to COVID-19. So that's good. We'll see. It's going to be a minute till we see how his approach to COVID-19 plays out differently compared to Trump's. I can't really gauge that yet. It's only been 3 weeks, but I think most people agree we needed a new approach to handling the pandemic. So there's that. That's objectively good. He had a lot more executive orders. I was kind of reading through them this morning. He's made tons of them, like dozens and dozens of orders already, and directives and different executive initiatives. And most of them I would say I agree with. There's a few that are pretty sketchy. But, for the most part, it was stuff that was basically undoing all the Trump era executive orders. So I guess it depends on your political views if you see that as good or not. But personally, I do. And then moving to, the other good thing about this whole Biden campaign was a very diverse cabinet. That was heavily reported on. Most people probably know about that. 45% of the cabinet was female, 55% was non-white. So this is the most diverse presidential cabinet in U.S. history, which isn't meaningless. I mean, this is certainly a achievement. He's got the first Native American cabinet member, as far as I could tell, first Native American cabinet member ever on any presidential cabinet. And she's a woman, kind of cool. And she's heading the Department of the Interior, making her the first Native American to oversee the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is kind of insane that we haven't already had Native Americans in charge of that. It's mostly been white men, surprise. So I thought that was really significant. Maybe the most significant achievement in his cabinet was putting Native American in charge of actual Native affairs. That's really cool. And to that end, I think another executive order he had was disallowing access for the North Dakota oil pipeline, which was affecting multiple Native American nations, as far as I know. It was a Standing Rock. That was the whole controversy. I don't remember the specifics on that, but basically he's pushing back against that oil expansion and infrastructure projects, which is good. This is all stuff that's benefiting marginalized people. So those are some of the kind of major headlines of good stuff he did. Another thing I put in like the good category was impeachment. I'm like, I do feel a little torn. On one hand, I definitely think that Donald Trump needs to be impeached just for the principle of it. I mean, we have to set some kind of standard where you can't operate the way he did for the last 4 years. You can't incite violence. You can't spread hate as maliciously and as constantly as he did and just get away with it. We have to hold him accountable for that. And he should be impeached. The thing is, we already voted him out. So it's kind of like, is this really a priority? And I mean, personally, on the other hand, I guess, because I guess I said I felt torn. The other hand is like, this is kind of a smokescreen, because impeachment pales in comparison to the other issues we're facing right now, which I'll kind of get into more, and that sort of brings me to the bad of Joe Biden's presidency so far. So, obviously the first thing that comes, I think the thing that is most prevalent in people's minds, the issue that most Americans are worried about right now, is stimulus, right? The average person is struggling right now way more than they have been in previous years. And we've hardly gotten any assistance from the government still. Most countries, the UK, Canada, Japan, all these developed nations are supplementing and stimulating their populations with wages. And I think, UK, for example, they're giving workers like 80% of the wages that they would have been getting if they were working. They're offering people free housing in China. They're giving landlords money in China and Japan. They're stimulating their people and their economy the way you should be in this kind of situation in order to not suffer a complete and total collapse. The United States approach has basically been to abandon everybody. And so far, we're not really seeing a change in that from Biden. So regarding the whole stimulus thing, he was really pushing the $2,000 checks the whole time he was running during the Georgia Senate runoff races, which were a huge deal. Both the Democratic senators who ended up winning were, in all their stump speeches, heavily pushing $2,000 checks and basically saying, if we are elected, this is going to be priority number one. And that appealed to people, and it was probably a big reason why they won, because you don't hear the Republicans saying the same thing. And so, these senators win, Joe Biden wins, and what happens? They immediately go, well, $2,000 checks might not happen. There was this was an excerpt from a smaller news outlet kind of reporting on it, and they said that misleading immediate $2,000 check, you might remember the then presidential candidate Joe Biden promise, has already dropped to $1,400 because $600 was already approved and delivered by Trump in his second stimulus check. So that was their justification for lowering it initially. I think partially they were like, oh, well, it's going to be easier to get a $1,400 check through a Republican Senate, which doesn't make any sense now because the Democrats control the Senate, so there's really no excuse for any of this. So, Biden was like, basically, if we get elected, $2,000 checks are going to go out immediately. Now we're on $1,400 checks, and it's looking like they're not going to arrive till maybe March. A House committee, I saw something this morning actually, House committee basically voted to approve the $1,400 checks. So that's going to go to the House now, and they're going to vote on it, and I'm sure they'll pass it. And the Senate will probably pass it too, but $1,400 checks, we got to ask ourselves, like, is this anything? This is scraps. Like, what are the American people supposed to do with that? That's nothing. That's not even rent in major cities. Like, that's anyways. So I mean, he's basically abandoned all of his promises regarding stimulus. Another thing that I think most people don't really know about, mainly because it's been completely blacked out by mainstream media, is that Biden is seeking extradition for Julian Assange. If you don't know, Julian Assange, creator of WikiLeaks, exposed tons of government corruption and basically widespread spying programs and information gathering. Same principle as Edward Snowden, who has been basically regarded as a hero now and has a movie made about him. Biden is looking to extradite Assange back to the United States. Currently, Assange is in the United Kingdom, and the UK has consistently refused to extradite him back to the United States because, as they've put it, they're afraid he will commit suicide in United States federal prisons. Whether or not they're actually talking about committing suicide or some sort of suspicious suicide circumstances where the camera turns off and all of a sudden he's hanging from a rope in his jail cell in a maximum security prison. Who knows? But anyways, there was this article from the New York Times actually talking about this, and they wrote, the indictment of Mr. Assange threatens press freedom because much of the conduct described in the indictment is conduct that journalists engage in routinely and that they must engage in order to do the work the public needs them to do. The letter said, adding, news organizations frequently and necessarily publish classified information in order to inform the public of matters of profound public significance. The Freedom of the Press Foundation organized the letter. Other signers, about 24 groups, included the American Civil Liberties Union, Amnesty International USA, the Center for Constitutional Rights, the Committee to Protect Journalists, Demand Progress, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Human Rights Watch, the Knight's First Amendment Institute, the Project on Government Oversight, and Reporters Without Borders, all urging Joe Biden to stop seeking extradition for Julian Assange and to let him go. And they go on to talk about in this article that if the U.S. does extradite Assange and Biden goes through with this and convicts him and throws him in prison, the precedent that this will set is going to be criminal. I mean, he will have effectively captured and convicted a journalist who was doing his job, and he's going to be silencing free speech. That's what this controversy is about. and that's why mainstream media isn't talking about it. So I think that that's something that's super important for people to be paying attention to. And this is the kind of story that just flies totally under the radar. But, you know, I'm not super hopeful that UK can hold out forever and not extraditing him just because their relationship to us is so close. We'll see. I hope they don't, because he probably will commit suicide if they send him to Terre Haute or whatever. Anyways, another thing I found on Biden that has been also, this one's been a little more widely reported on, but still kind of blacked out. Basically, Biden is abandoning a deal we had with the Taliban in Afghanistan to pull out, to basically conduct a full withdrawal of all U.S. troops in the region, in the country of Afghanistan. So Trump had signed this deal with the Taliban previously, agreeing that we were going to do this, I believe, like starting in 2021. And Biden has basically said that he doesn't support a full withdrawal of U.S. troops. In other words, he's going to violate the terms of this treaty, which will inevitably escalate tensions significantly in the region. And I mean, we have to ask ourselves, why the hell not? Why wouldn't we pull out? I mean, there is literally no reason to be in the Middle East anymore. It's a money-making scheme. Anyone who tries to tell you otherwise is either been duped or they're in on it somehow, because there is literally no justifiable reason that the United States should still be fighting any wars in the Middle East. You know, new polls, I saw some stats here. New polls show 70% of veterans support a full withdrawal from Afghanistan. 53% of the American public supports this. The U.S. has spent $6.4 trillion on wars in the Middle East since 2001. 800,000 people have died. Half of them were civilians. And 21 million people have been displaced. Now ask yourself, is this worth it? We're spreading democracy. You know, we're trying to fight these regime change wars where we're instituting our own leaders into these countries and we're freeing them from the oppression of, you know, tyranny and theocracy. And why are we really here? What the hell are we doing? This doesn't really get reported on. That last part about the spending, I actually found on CNBC. That was an old article. But, you know, this whole rescindment of the Taliban deal, nobody's really talking about that. And I think a lot of people might be like, well, why the hell should we be making deals with the Taliban? And I'm like, well, obviously, the Taliban's not some kind of godly organization. I'm not saying that, you know, they're righteous in any way, and that, you know, they probably don't deserve to be in any position of power. But what right do we have to still be in this foreign country interfering with their affairs? I would say even less. The Taliban is actually constituted by locals and people who have basically been victims of this insurgency war that the U.S. has been fighting for 2 decades. So we got a few things, you know, so he's seeking extradition for Assange. There's the whole stimulus thing. The wars in the Middle East are seemingly going to continue. Last thing I wanted to talk about, there's a lot more I could go into, but I'm already almost at like 20 minutes of this video. The last thing I want to talk about is Biden basically abandoning the $15 minimum wage that he promised continually throughout his entire campaign. Notice how many campaign promises he's already fucking broken 3 weeks in. Pardon my French. It's really frustrating though. You know, we only get 1 or 2 shots at major bipartisan bill initiatives every year, you know, and that's like best case scenario. And Biden's own advisor, David Bluff, who's a former Obama staffer, basically told him, if you want to get this $15 minimum wage, you need to put it into this stimulus bill, into this COVID relief package, because otherwise you're going to have to do it as its own individual initiative, and there's no way it's passing on its own. And Biden has basically said, it's not a priority right now. Once he got elected, that's what he started saying, of course. And he started talking about, well, we can incrementally raise wages, and over time, we'll slowly work our way up to $15. I'm like, that's not how bargaining works. That's not, if you want a $15 minimum wage, you should come to the table and say, we want a $20 minimum wage, and then let the other side rebuttal and say, whoa, that's crazy. Just let's stick with 15. There you go. You've just effectively won that battle. But the thing is, he doesn't want $15 minimum wage because Biden is bought out by the banks and major corporations, like I talked about in the last video. So he's saying all of this stuff that's supposed to appeal to the masses and the proletariat, and then he's abandoning it once he actually gets into the position of power. That information about the $15 minimum wage being dropped is also from CNBC. I'll drop the links to all this information in the description of this video. So if you're curious about any of this info or questioning some of the stuff I brought up, you can check that out. I think it's kind of important to compile all we've seen so far of Biden and really get a full comprehensive look at his actions, because you watch, liberal mainstream media, CNBC, MSNBC, whatever, CNN, whatever, they're going to give you a very one-sided side, and it's basically going to be that, yay, the war is won, Trump is gone, and Biden is king, and he's doing everything amazing, and we're back to the good old days of Obama where nothing was bad. You watch Fox News, it's just, they're going to tell you we're in like an apocalyptic hellscape, so you got to find an in-between there, because obviously neither of those sides are giving you a very accurate perception of what's going on. So I think I want to continue to do videos like this and sort of weigh the good and the bad, honestly. I do honestly think that some of the stuff Biden did was good, but I think so far what we're seeing is the bad far outweighs the good, because the bad stuff he's doing, the ramifications that it has are much more significant than the ramifications of the good things that he's doing. One man's opinion. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Like this video, subscribe, tell me what I should talk about next, criticize my video quality. This video quality is better than the previous ones, at least. I wasn't like walking around and like huffing and puffing. And anyways, let's hope Democrats and Biden can push a little harder and fight a little harder for the people, because we need that right now.